So this is a presentation in two parts. The first part is going to take place here in the lecture hall, where Jana and Katarina and Daniel will present. It will be a short presentation, about 20 minutes, and then we're going to go together into the gallery where questions will be taken, and there'll be an opportunity for Jana to share some more insights into the work, and also there will be a reception. So,
AKA food.
AKA food, right. So we'll all go there afterwards. So Jana, this is her second year with us. She is interested in the interaction of architecture and landscape, which I'm sure everybody has figured out at this point. Her work and research focuses on food systems, forestry practice, and the ways in which buildings act as extensions of larger urban ecological networks. VanderGoot was the recipient of the 2010 Institute of Classical Architecture and Art Rieger Grand Prize and is an affiliated fellow of the American Academy in Rome, where she conducted research on ancient and modern food systems and their role in the formation of public space, and that certainly led into the work that we'll hear about tonight. And their relationship to public space, culture, and architecture in the urban context of Rome. VanderGoot is here as an assistant professor of architecture at our school, and she has taught architecture at the University of Virginia, and in 2012 was the director of the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture Summer Design Institute there. She holds a Master of Landscape Architecture degree from Harvard University, where she received a Merit Award from the American Society of Landscape Architects. She also holds a Master of Architecture from the University of Virginia, where her thesis work on urban food foraging practices as a catalyst for public spaces in the city of Charlottesville earned a Washington Unbuilt Honor Award from the Washington, D.C. AIA. And VanderGoot has received her Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Notre Dame. She's a registered architect and a founding partner of VanderGoot Esben Studio. And help me please welcome her to her hometown, to University of Maryland. Thank you so much.
All right. Just realized I don't have a hand, so we'll flip this. Is it working? Can you hear me?
You have to turn it on.
It's not on. Okay.
I didn't turn it on.
Oh, okay. Good. So those incriminating things we said, nobody. Okay, well, thanks all for coming tonight. I'm going to keep this brief so that we can go into the gallery and have more conversations and eat food. But I did want to say a few words about the exhibit and also show you some of the records of how people have interacted with the exhibit so far this semester. So the title of the exhibit is Table in Rome 2. It's the second in a series of exhibits. And this exhibit is Forum as Planted Field. Before I get into the slides, I'd like to just say thank you to the exhibit design team. I collaborated with my partner, Michael Esban, partner at VanderGoot Esban Studio, and the student collaborators who were amazing and pulled the lion's share of the work. Daniel Holt, Katarina Svensson, and Amy Murrin, who's from the Landscape Architecture program. So thank you so much for all your amazing work this summer. I'd also like to acknowledge that the exhibit was fully funded by the University of Maryland Creative and Performing Arts Award, the CAPA Award. And I'd like to thank Ronit, of course, the gallery director, and Dean Cronrath, Brian Kelly, Ashley, and the woodshop manager, Joe, all for helping out this summer in an incredible way to get the exhibit up and running. And then a few more thanks to some of the courses and people from the dance program and the art program who have come over this semester and provided some of the amazing footage you'll see tonight. So this exhibit, like I said, is the second in a series of exhibits about the idea of table in Rome. And table essentially is a larger conversation about the journey of food, the journey that food makes from an earthen floor to a table, right? So that conversation is about the spatial manifestations of a culture and conversation around the table. It's about socio-political uprisings. It's about architecture. It's about landscape architecture. It's about many things. The first exhibit, I'll say, just to give you a little bit of background, focused on table as a locus, right? So locus is a kind of spatial idea. It's a center of gravity. It's a point or a node. And so I looked at altars in Rome, right? Altars are kind of the center of gravity, or a place where people come to celebrate and have religious rituals. So that first exhibit explored two really important species, the grape, vitis, and grain, wheat. These plant species, or these foods, are very, very important to the culture of ancient Rome. And so Table in Rome was an exhibit that highlighted grain and wheat. It was an interactive exhibit, so the people who came to the exhibit, and it was up over 2 weeks, were asked to make libations or pour wine over anything they wanted to pour wine over. And so you see here some of the marks of people using the patera, the cup, that's used in ancient Rome to make libations, and then grain. But what I realized in this exhibit, and what I realized when I was in Rome at the academy studying the idea of table, is that probably the most important thing when I was trying to define what I thought table meant was that table represented the collective sphere. So table is a collective experience, and what you see here in the first exhibit is a group of people playing with the grain on the floor. And so this exhibit as well, in my mind, was about collectivity, collective space. And so you see here the design collaborators in the exhibit, Michael Esbon, Dan, and Katerina, playing with the dowel wall in a collective way. In this exhibit, table, so the first exhibit, table was locus, which is a center of gravity, right? And this is an architectural idea. In this exhibit, table is field, so it's expanded. And I wanted to look closely at the idea of table as field, because I think field is a really important idea in architecture, and I think it's really important and productive for architects to think about field, because it helps us connect our building to larger complex systems, right? Our buildings tend to sometimes end up being objects or centers, but if we understand them as part of a larger field condition, then we can plug into larger urban systems. So this exhibit is about table as field. Field is many, not one. Field is collective. And in this exhibit, table is a productive surface, right? Table is social, table is physical, table is political. And table also, when it's a field, changes over time. This is a really important idea, that a field condition changes, right? So it's hard to capture it in one image. So what you see here are many images streamed together in order to show Katerina changing the planted dowel wall from a forest to a forest with a clearing and an altar in the center. Some of the themes or important ideas behind this exhibit are that the first templum was actually a clearing in the forest. So this is an architectural idea that a lot of architectural historians and archaeologists have played around with, and it's at the heart of this exhibit, that the templum or the temple actually is a space. It's not the object that we think of when we think of temple. And the Latin word templum means space. And there are many texts that reference the first templums as clearings and forests. And then I thought this was an interesting quote as well from 1813. Forests, or planted fields, were the first temples of divinity, and it is in the forest that men have grasped the first idea of architecture. So in this exhibit, one of the key moments in this exhibit is a forest or a sacred grove, and there's an animation at the base of the forest, and the animation is called Forum in Succession. And it illustrates the progression from a forest, you see up on the top, a forest of trees, all the way to a forum and a temple in Rome. So I'll show you that progression. It starts off as a forest, And then maybe there's a sacred tree. Sacred tree is found. The forest starts to be cleared around the tree. Maybe an altar is placed. The altar starts to become more regularized. The trees around the temple start to become more regular. The trees are replaced with columns. And then ultimately that progresses to what you maybe would recognize now as the city fabric or a temple forum in Rome. And instead of the trees, we see that the city fabric it expands to become the planted field or the forest around each templum or open space. So that's one piece of the exhibit, exploring this theory that the first templums or spaces were actually field conditions. They were productive surfaces. So just to talk a little bit more about the importance of a field condition for architectural design. Field is about textures, it's about grains, regulating lines, underlying structures that hold together edges and centers. Architect Stan Allen writes about fields and their potential to provide architects with a design vocabulary for buildings within complex urban sites and systems. So what I mentioned before. He says, one of the potentials of the field is to redefine the relationship between figure and ground. If we think of the figure not as demarcated object read against a stable field, but as an effect emerging from the field itself, so something happening in time, as a moment of intensity, as peaks or valleys within a continuous field, then it might be possible to imagine figure and field more closely allied. So this is one of the themes at the heart of this exhibit. And that theme is captured by what we call the planted dowel wall, which is a productive surface, the field condition, and it's been manipulated through the semester and it's been changing over time. I'll show you some footage of that. The forest forum, or the templum. So what you see here is an acrylic tube filled with shavings from a pine tree. We found that actually pine is a very sacred plant, also in ancient Rome, and it's one of the major species in the forests surrounding Rome. And then you'll also see a couple boards in the exhibit that talk about particular spaces in the city of Rome that capture this idea of table as a field, table as a productive surface, and as a field condition. So the Forum Boarium, which is one of the most ancient forums in Rome, and the Prati del Popolo Romano, which was a field with mulberry trees. You see the image on the left, below Monte Testaccio, which is an ancient landfill. What you see on the right is a personification of the Tiber River. And he's not shown with dolphins and porpoises or big waves of water. He's actually shown with a cornucopia and a pine cone on the top. And I thought it was a very interesting image of Tiber because he's not the god of water, he's actually the god who plants seeds. Because when the Tiber floods, it brings with it nutrients and seeds, and that plants the earth. And that's how the Romans saw the god Tiber. And so you see here in this image, on the top, by the bend in the river, is the Forum Boarium. On the bottom, you see Monte Testaccio, and just below it is Prati. And both of these fields were often flooded by the Tiber. So both of these fields I consider productive in terms of producing plants, but they also were very productive as social spaces. The Forum Boarium was a market where meat was sold. It was also a place where grain was doled out. And the Prati del Popolo was a place where Ottobrate, which is the October festival that celebrates wine, was often celebrated. So those are two spaces in Rome that I think capture the essence of table as a field. These drawings are really me looking at the Noli plan of the Prati and of the Forum Boarium and tracing the field condition with a series of regulating lines, going through this exercise to really understand the structure of the city fabric as it relates to the gardens and the planted fields, and how that larger field actually holds the buildings. The second project you'll see happened much later, and it's not in Rome, but it's very much connected to Rome during the fascist era. Benito Mussolini changed the Italian government of ancient Rome such that it became a political dictatorship. And in 1939, in this city, just north of Rome, Entrodocco, the forestry school planted a pine plantation on the mountains, and they carved away the trees so that the letters D-U-X remained. And D-U-X stood for Duke, or it was Mussolini's nickname, right? So this planted field, which is now kind of an elevation or a backdrop to the city, is a reminder of this kind of fascist era, this socio-political change, and it remains there today. I think it's a case, we could call it table, it's a case where a productive surface was planted to yield something, to yield physical space, but also to yield socio-political change, right? So this image shows that planted productive surface from the top. You can see the letters and the pine plantation in front of it. It's a little bit hard to see, but on the left and right are the types of pine trees that were used. The image on the left shows the umbrella pine, which is all over the landscape in Rome. And it also produces the really tasty food, the pine nut. And if some of you are daring tonight, there are cookies made with pine nuts and also rosemary, which is close to pine, not quite pine needles. I didn't want to scare you off with pine needles. But you know, the pine tree is a plant that can be used to create table, actually also yields food. And so the pine tree is also a really important part of this exhibit, and you'll see that most of the exhibit is made out of pine. The final two slides I want to show you before I show you some of the videos are what I call marks of the activity of table. Right? So people came into the exhibit and changed it this semester, and those activities came and went. And what we have are just the records, right? The mark, the physical mark that's left over. And for architects, I think that physical mark that's left over after an activity takes place is something to think about quite carefully. So I'm going to show you a couple still shots and then a few videos, really quick videos. And what I want you to think about when you look at these still shots is that when you interact with this exhibit, you're designing the field, right? And the field changes over time. So visitors to the exhibit, all of you, are invited to plant the field by changing the exhibit. And I don't want you to be shy. I actually had the thought in the car ride over, wouldn't it be awesome if somebody had graffitied the exhibit like the day before this gallery talk? Wouldn't it be terrible, but then really awesome? And you know, I think my heart kind of stopped, and then I felt peaceful because I thought, you know what, this is the lesson of a field condition. If we're designing field conditions, we have to plant catalytic elements, but we also have to respect the idea of indeterminacy, right? That if we create a building and it's interacted with over time, you kind of have to let it go and let people make their mark. And I think that's something very beautiful. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the exhibit changes over the rest of the semester. It's November 17, it's coming down in January. I'm hoping that as the weather starts to change, people will have wet and muddy boots, and that maybe their tracks will start showing up on the plywood floor to reveal the most traveled paths. And dirty fingerprints on the acrylic tubes. These are all marks of the activity, and I think they're a really beautiful element in design. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you these series of stills. sequences are a two-part, or they're a dance. This is one side of the double wall, and the next series is the other side. So at the end of the first part of the dance, all of the dowels were out. And this is the other side of the wall. The orchestrators deforesting the field here. And that's the mark, you know, when the dancers are gone, that's what's left. I'll show you a couple of videos because as they were deforesting, the sound was pretty loud. We kind of calibrated the sound, so hopefully I won't blow your ears out here with the videos, but I'll try. These are pretty short videos. Short, so it was the loudest. Two more videos here. Trees will fall down, but that's okay. They can go back up or they can stay down. And if you dance intimately with the trees, like you know with the girl, you will untwist the trees and they'll fall down, so just be aware. Okay, so that's it. I'd like to let Daniel and Katerina, who were a really huge part of getting the exhibit together, I'd like to leave them some time to make some comments, and I'll hand this mic over to you. One last thing before Katerina talks. This was a construction process, and we kept documentation of all of our conversations and the ordering of material and the design details. So this binder is in the exhibit. For those of you taking 600, it might be particularly interesting to see some of the construction documentation. Thanks.
So I'd like to start by thanking Jana and everyone working on the exhibit for not only the opportunity, but a great experience. And I think, especially working on this exhibit, one of the best parts has been really bringing to life the concepts and ideas that we had talked about, figure ground, time, how we can begin to capture that in the animation and the table, and how we can really find different ways of bringing this idea of field and table into existence. And I think as well, it was really interesting looking at how we can begin to integrate these different pieces of the exhibit together, how we can create a cohesive exhibit and pieces. As well as then looking at, during installation, all the design challenges we came across and really having, you know, a day or less to come up with new innovative solutions. And so it's been a great experience.